Hi everyone, it's Nini. Welcome to my channel. I like to focus on Midwest true crime because I'm a Minnesota farmer's daughter. Today I'm going to talk about 5 cases that occurred in the Midwest on Halloween. In order to prevent this video from being 80 hours long, these are going to be truncated versions of the cases. Let's just get right into it. The first case is one of the most well-known cases to have occurred on Halloween. It happened in Wisconsin and it changed Halloween forever for not only people in the state, but people all over the United States. Lisa Ann French was born on June 2nd, 1964 to Alan and Mary Ann. In 1973, when she was 9, she lived in Fond du Lac with her mother, stepfather, and new baby brother. She was a 4th grader and a Girl Scout. On Halloween night, Lisa dressed in a hobo costume and left her house around 5:45 p.m. She was going to a Halloween party down the street and had planned to go with a friend, but that friend had gotten in trouble and was grounded, so Lisa took off for the party by herself, stopping at homes along the way to trick or treat. Lisa's parents became worried when she didn't come home for her 7 p.m. curfew. They called the police and a massive search began looking for Lisa. On the 4th day of the search, 2 garbage bags were found in a field. One contained Lisa's hobo costume and the other contained her naked body. The autopsy revealed very disturbing findings. Lisa had been brutally sexually assaulted and her cause of death was a heart attack. The coroner thinks as Lisa was being assaulted, she went into shock. That is one of the most saddest details I've ever heard in any true crime case. She basically died of terror over what was happening to her. Police interviewed everybody who lived on the street and friends and family, but they came up with no leads. About 5 months later, in March of 1974, they still had no leads, so they decided to talk to all the neighbors again to see if they could remember any more details. One of those neighbors' stories was different from what he had originally told police. That neighbor was Gerald Turner Jr. Gerald lived half a block away from the French family with his girlfriend and their baby. He admitted to police he knew the family. He not only lived on the same street as them, but he used to live in the opposite side of a duplex of them. And he also said that Lisa watched his baby a lot. Due to the discrepancy in his stories, police asked him to come down for further questioning, which he willingly did. He also agreed to give hair samples and fiber samples from his bedspread. His hair matched some hairs that were found on Lisa's body. It also came out that Gerald had allegedly raped a 15-year-old babysitter in December of 1972, prior to Lisa's murder. In August of 1974, Gerald admitted to raping Lisa and causing her death. In his confession, Gerald said Lisa came to his house to trick or treat that night. He said when he saw her standing at his door, something came over him that sparked a sexual desire in him. They started talking about candy, and he got Lisa to come into his house and then back to his bedroom where he sexually assaulted her. He said after it was over, he realized she wasn't breathing. He tried to revive her and couldn't, so he then disposed of her clothes and body in the garbage bags. He was charged with first-degree murder, sexual perversion, enticing a child for immoral purposes, and indecent behavior with a child. His defense tried to get the confession thrown out, so the case went to trial. In February of 1975, Gerald was found guilty of all charges except for first-degree murder. The jury found him guilty of second-degree murder instead. He was sentenced to 38 years in prison. In October of 1992, Gerald was released on parole for good behavior. People in the community heavily protested this, and Lisa's family was obviously furious. The court later realized they miscalculated when he would be eligible for parole, and he had actually been let out too soon. So in 1993, they sent him back to prison. But this caused the state of Wisconsin to create a new law called Turner's Law, which put a requirement in place if someone was released on parole and they were deemed a sexually violent predator and highly likely to reoffend, they were required to live in a mental institution. In 1998, Gerald was released on parole again, but a parole hearing determined he was not a violent sexual predator, so the law that was created because of him didn't even apply to him. Gerald moved into a halfway house instead of a mental institution. In 2003, they found an abundance of porn on his computer, which was a violation of parole, and he was sent back to prison for another 15 years. He was set to be released again in February of 2018, but Lisa's mother started a petition to make Turner's Law apply to him. After all those years, Lisa's mother never stopped fighting for justice for her daughter. The state of Wisconsin filed a legal petition so that Gerald would have to move into a mental institution instead of just out on the streets when he was released. Over the next few years, the case was held up in a lot of hearings, and then COVID happened, which delayed things even further. In February of 2022, a judge ruled that there was probable cause to label Gerald a violent sexual predator. He was released and currently lives in a treatment center for sexually violent people. Gerald Turner Jr. was later known as the Halloween Killer. Lisa's murder forever changed how people viewed trick-or-treating because it was no longer looked at as safe for children to go out alone. The next case is a cold case from Iowa. On Halloween 1982, Marvin and Ethel Brandland handed out candy to trick-or-treaters at their home in Fort Dodge, Iowa. Marvin was a World War II veteran and owned a carpet business. He and Ethel had been married for 46 years. Someone knocked on the door wearing a pillowcase over their head with holes cut out for the eyes. He said, "Trick or treat, give me your money or I'll shoot." Since this was Halloween night, Ethel thought it was just a playful prank, and so she tried to take the pillowcase off the person's head, but they held it down and then pulled out a gun. He pointed it at Marvin and Ethel and told them to go into the kitchen and then down to the basement, but Marvin refused. The person then shot Marvin in his throat. He took off the pillowcase and threw it on the ground and then ran out of the house. Ethel told police it was a blonde-haired, blue-eyed male who looked to be about 5'8" and between the ages of 16 and 22. Marvin was rushed to a hospital in Des Moines but died during surgery. Ethel was devastated. Like I said, they had been married for 46 years. A few months after Marvin's murder, Ethel died from what the family believed was a broken heart. Family members were sure that they knew who the shooter was based on that description Ethel had given because an acquaintance of the family matched that description. They also knew it probably had to be somebody who knew the family because the shooter had told them to go down to the basement, and that was where Marvin and Ethel kept their safe, and very few people knew about that, mostly just family members. Apparently, this person even bragged to family members that he had been the one to shoot Marvin, but police did not have any evidence to arrest him. Some DNA that had been found on the pillowcase was tested against the suspect, but there hadn't been enough DNA to confirm that it was a match. I don't believe this person's name has ever been released to the public by authorities, but he's still the main suspect. The family is hoping with advances in DNA technology that someday they will be able to match the DNA that was on the pillowcase to this person. Marvin's granddaughter, Teresa Trueblood, said, quote, "For the longest time we didn't pursue anything because we knew in our stomach, in our gut, who it was. But there was fear, and Grandma always lived in fear. But I know they would want it solved. They'd want us safe. We owe it to them." Unquote. The Iowa Department of Criminal Investigations created a cold case unit in 2009, and they took on Marvin's case, but it is unfortunately still unsolved today. The next case is another cold case, and this one is in Minnesota. Chris Jenkins was born on February 17th, 1981 in Mound, Minnesota. He was a great athlete and had been captain of his high school lacrosse team. In 2002, when Chris was 21, he was a senior at the University of Minnesota studying management. On Halloween night, Chris dressed in an American Indian costume. He, his girlfriend, and a few friends went to the Lone Tree Bar and Grill in downtown Minneapolis. They got to the bar between 10:30 and 11 p.m. Apparently around midnight, Chris was kicked out of the bar, but I couldn't find out why. The bouncer said he saw Chris take a left on Hennepin Avenue. He was never seen alive again. When he didn't return home that evening, the police were called and they began looking for Chris, but there was no trace of him. 4 months later, someone walking across the 3rd Avenue Bridge spotted a body in the Mississippi River. It was face up and caught in some trees near the St. Anthony Falls spillway. It was the body of Chris Jenkins. He was still wearing his Halloween costume. An autopsy revealed the cause of death to be drowning, but the manner of death was unknown. Because Chris had been drinking, police believed the drowning was an accident. They also thought maybe he committed suicide. His parents, Steve and Jan, never believed it was an accident, and they definitely didn't believe it was suicide. Chris was getting excellent grades in college. He was about to graduate. He already had job interviews lined up, and he was excited and looking forward to starting his life after college. college. They kept pressuring police to look into the case more. They even hired their own private investigator. The private investigator found witnesses who said they saw about 10 men attacking a man in front of Times Square Pizza that night, which was directly across from the Lone Tree Bar. I'm not sure where the Times Square Pizza was exactly because it's no longer there. I believe the Lone Tree Bar closed down too, but this was the building that it was in. Across the street from that is what I think was the Times Square Pizza, and across from that is a parking garage that I'm going to talk about in a little bit. But I could have those buildings wrong. 2 bloodhounds with different handlers were brought to that spot, and they picked up on Chris's scent on the sidewalk and followed it into the nearby parking garage. And I thought this was cool because the dogs were brought there at separate times, but they both led their handler to the exact same parking spot. Apparently some blood and a red feather was found on that parking spot. The feather was similar to what Chris had in his costume that night. I would assume if blood was found, they would have done a DNA test to see if it was Chris's blood, but I didn't read if they did that or not. In November of 2006, Minneapolis police changed Chris's death to a homicide after somebody who was already in jail came forward and said that they had seen Chris being thrown off the bridge that night, but they didn't have enough evidence to arrest anybody. The case is still unsolved, so police haven't released all of the details that this person told them. I don't think they've even released who it was, but a Minneapolis police sergeant said, quote, "This person has given me very specific details of the exact spot where Christopher Jenkins was thrown off of a bridge. I'll just leave it at that," unquote. The police chief issued a formal public apology to Chris's parents. One theory is that Chris is a victim of the smiley face killer. This is a serial killer who has never been caught, and the exact number of victims is unknown, but it's believed to be around 40, and they are all mostly male college students, and mostly in Midwest states. Victims would be found drowned in rivers, and in some of the cases, a spray-painted graffiti smiley face was found near where the bodies were found. So some of the details in Chris's case do line up with the smiley face theory. Unfortunately, his murder is still unsolved today. For our next case, we go to Ohio. On Halloween morning in 2010, 16-year-old Devin Griffin returned to the home of his stepfather Billy and mother Susan near Martin. Devin had spent the night at his father's house. He went straight up to his bedroom and changed into church clothes and then came back downstairs. He then ran into his 24-year-old stepbrother William. William asked him where he was going and how long he would be gone. Devin told him he was going to church because he was going to sing in the choir. That afternoon, Devin returned home. The house was quiet, but he didn't think too much of it. It was a lazy Sunday afternoon. He noticed William was gone too. He went upstairs to his bedroom, put on his headphones, and played video games for a few hours. That evening, he went downstairs and he noticed the house was still quiet, and that time it did strike him as odd. He went upstairs to his mother and stepfather's bedroom and found them lying in bed. He called out his mother's name, but she didn't respond, so he walked over to the bed. He pulled back the covers and noticed that the pillow was covered in blood. Very similar to Ethel Brandland. Because it was Halloween, he thought it was maybe a prank and it was fake blood. He said it seemed like, quote, something out of a haunted house, unquote. But he soon realized that the blood was real and his mother was not breathing. He ran out of the house and called his Aunt Lori, who called 911.
"We need an ambulance and the sheriff to show up, please." "Where's the blood?" "It's on the bed." "In their house? In their bed?" He said it's in their bed. "Okay." "Oh my God! Lori? I don't know. Bill's in the bed. He's dead. He's got to be dead." "Okay. Did it look like maybe he was shot?" "Oh, he's either shot or stabbed or something."
When police arrived, they confirmed that Billy and Susan were both dead. Billy had been shot 5 times in his face. Susan had been shot 3 times in her head, and an autopsy would reveal that she had been assaulted after her death. They also found Devin's 23-year-old brother Derek dead in his bed. He had been struck in the head with a claw hammer. It appeared as though all 3 had been killed while they were sleeping. Neighbors told police they heard gunshots around 6:30 a.m. that morning, but it didn't strike them as odd because they lived in the country and people frequently hunted. That means that when Devin got home that morning, his family was already dead. And when he came back in the afternoon and sat in his room playing video games, His family was lying there dead in the rooms next to him. He has got to be so traumatized. William was nowhere to be found. The family's pickup truck was also missing. When Lori had called 911, she told the operator that the family had been having a lot of issues with William.
His son DJ was here last night. They were going to go hunting. They've had a lot of trouble with him, with the law. And he's threatened Susie before.
William was Billy's son from his first marriage. He had been in a lot of trouble when he was in school, and he frequently bullied other children. He had a lot of issues with anger. He had also previously been in trouble with the law. From the day Billy and Susan married, William hated Susan. In 2004, he was charged with assault after he hit Susan in her chest. Not long after that, he was charged with assault and robbery after he struck her with a coffee cup and then stole her car. He was psychologically evaluated at that point and diagnosed as schizophrenic. He was deemed unfit to stand trial for the assault charges due to his mental disorders, so he moved into a group home and received treatment. He then returned to living with his family. Not long after moving back in with his family, Susan was taking a shower and William burst in and started to attack her. Susan and Billy had had enough, and Billy kicked William out of the house. William moved into a halfway house near the family, but he would frequently go there and visit them. The visits always made Susan and her sons uneasy. Neighbors around the Liske family home started to lose pets. It sounds like Billy and Susan were suspicious that William was killing the animals, which is a huge red flag. Billy still loved his son, and even though he was at his wit's end on what to do about William's behavior, he still wanted to try to be a good father to him and show him that he was loved. He often took William to their cabin to spend time outdoors. Police would find William hiding in that cabin, which was about 175 miles away from their house. He was arrested for the murders and initially pled not guilty, but then changed his plea to guilty in order to avoid the death penalty. It's really eerie because in some of the photos from court, William almost looks like he's smiling. Billy was a veteran of the U.S. Air Force. He met Susan through work, and in 2001 they got married. Billy loved being outdoors, hunting, fishing, gardening. Susan had 2 boys from her first marriage, Derek and Devin. Like her second husband, she loved being outdoors. She was described as having a big heart and was a loving mother, aunt, and friend. While in high school, Derek had loved participating in track and even set a school record. He was a second-degree black belt and loved to sail on Lake Erie. William was sentenced to 3 life sentences without the possibility of parole. In March of 2015, when he was 29 years old, William committed suicide in his prison cell. For the last case, we go to Michigan, and this case has one of the sickest motives I have ever heard about in any true crime case. Rebekah Gay was born on March 26, 1988 in Midland, Michigan. She was described as quiet and pretty and had the nickname Beckaboo. While in high school, she was a member of the equestrian team and helped raise money for families who needed it during tragedies. After high school, she studied cosmetology and worked in a hair salon. She later started working at the Goodwill store in Mount Pleasant and was promoted to manager. She had a son when she was 21, and her son was her life. She was a very devoted mother. In 2012, Rebekah was 24 and living in a trailer park with her son, who was 3 at the time. She was also in a very happy relationship with a guy named Aaron. On October 31st, 2012, coworkers at that Goodwill store began to worry when Rebekah didn't show up for her shift. A search was started for her. One person involved in the search was John Douglas White, who was 55 years old and engaged to Rebekah's mother, Sally. He was a pastor at the Christ Community Fellowship Church, which was a really small church. It only had about 14 members. He gathered those people and asked them to pray for Rebekah to be found safely. John was close to her because he lived in that same trailer park as her, and he often babysat her son. I couldn't find out why, but police quickly looked at John as a suspect. I'm assuming they probably looked into the backgrounds of all the family members and people who were close to Rebekah, and John had a very disturbing criminal history. In 1980, he stabbed a 17-year-old girl 14 times. She survived, and he pled no contest and was sentenced to 5 to 10 years, but for some reason only served 2 years. In 1994, he killed a 26-year-old woman and pled guilty to involuntary manslaughter. While he was in prison, he told prison psychologists that he had fantasies about killing women and having sex with their dead bodies. but for some reason it was still deemed okay to release him in 2011 after being in prison for 13 years. It was then that he met Rebekah's mother and they began a relationship. John rather quickly confessed to murdering Rebekah. He said he watched a lot of necrophilia porn and had a strong desire for having sex with a dead body. He told police he had fantasized for 2 weeks about killing Rebekah and having sex with her corpse. It's just so sick. He told police he spent the night of October 30th drinking beer, and around 2 a.m. on October 31st, he went over to Rebekah's house. The door was unlocked, so he just walked right in, and he ran into Rebekah in the hallway. He struck her several times in her head with a rubber mallet until she passed out. He realized she was still breathing, so he tied a zip tie around her neck until she died. He did all of this as Rebekah's 3-year-old son was asleep in the next room. John told police that after he murdered Rebekah, he took off her clothes, but he couldn't remember if he had sex with her. He also told police he tried to get an erection and couldn't. So he told police he dumped her body near the intersection of Pickard and Coldwater, and police would find her body in the trees there. He said after he dumped her body, he returned to the trailer park and cleaned up. He drove her car to a nearby business and parked it there to try to make it look like she had been abducted from that location. After the sun came up, John dressed Rebekah's son in his Halloween costume and then dropped him off at his father's house. Michigan State Police found Rebekah's blood in John's trailer. They also found her blood and one of her necklaces in his truck. I can only imagine the emotions Rebekah's mother must have felt. Rage towards a man who she had loved and was going to marry, and he had murdered her daughter. And she no doubt felt guilty because she had brought this man into her daughter's life. At the sentencing, Sally said, quote, "For 20 excruciating hours, we prayed that Rebekah would come home. She was not yours to take. How dare you?" Unquote. She asked the court to show her former fiance the same lack of mercy he had shown her daughter. William was sentenced to 56 years in prison, which at the age of 55, I get that is a life sentence, but I wonder why he wasn't sentenced to life. This was his 3rd time attacking somebody and 2nd time killing somebody. So why would there be any chance of getting out? I don't get that. Regardless, prison was obviously too much for John. Shortly after he was sentenced, he hung himself in his prison cell. Rebekah's boyfriend Aaron was obviously heartbroken. He loved Rebekah and he loved her son. He had been planning to propose to her and had even already bought the engagement ring to give to her. That's all I have for these cases. It was kind of surprising to find that many that occurred on Halloween in the Midwest. I'd love to hear your thoughts about them below. I hope you have a safe and happy Halloween. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.